Hey, good people. Welcome to the Evolving Education Project podcast, hosted by me, Dr. Tiffany M. Neachai, and friends, where we center the educational joys, passions, interests, and inquiries of people of color. This episode is the book interview, part 2 of our Liberate Your Imagination, the dark, fantastic, and Black characters in fairy tales, fantasy, and sci-fi series. Today, we will be interviewing our inspiration for the series, Dr. Ebony Elizabeth Thomas. She is currently Associate Professor in the Division of Literacy, Culture, and International Education at the University of Pennsylvania, but will soon be joining the School of Education faculty at the University of Michigan. Building from her experiences as a Detroit-based public school teacher, she researches race and representation in children's and young adult texts, the pedagogy of African American literature, history, and culture in K-12 classrooms, and more. In her critically acclaimed book, The Dark Fantastic, Race and the Imagination from Harry Potter to the Hunger Games, Dr. Ebony Elizabeth Thomas analyzes the story arcs of dark characters, specifically Black girl characters, in mainstream films and television to show how they are limited and marginalized. As a result, these characters find themselves in a dark, fantastic cycle, moving from spectacle to hesitation and from violence to haunting. They can subvert this cycle only through an emancipation that is never realized. These characters include the Hunger Games' Rue, Gwen in the BBC's Merlin, the Vampire Diaries' Bonnie, and Harry Potter's Hermione, who is Black in the book. According to Thomas, their stories play out in these ways because the dark fantastic cycle in our collective imagination makes it difficult to suspend our disbelief that a Black girl can live happily ever after. As she discusses the consequences for readers when writers fail to imagine more for Black characters, Thomas shares autobiographical accounts and reflections around her own love and journey through the fantastic and larger world as she searched to find herself. To illustrate, she claims that my own experiences led me to seek why so many people felt that non-white characters do not belong either in magical medieval settings or in the spaceships of the future. I'm so excited to have Dr. Stephanie Toliver join me as co-host for this episode. Stephanie is an assistant professor of literacy and secondary humanities at the University of Colorado Boulder. Informed by her love of science fiction and fantasy texts, as well as her experience as a 9th and 10th grade English teacher, Stephanie's scholarship centers the freedom dreams of Black youth and honors the historical legacy that Black imaginations have had and will have on activism and social change. Now, let's listen in on our interview with Dr. Ebony Elizabeth Thomas so that we can learn more about her amazing book. So I just want to say, to get started, that this book right here, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. I knew it was good. I know who you are, but I was not ready. And it was, I just feel like you just took that thing to task. Like in every, like, and it just broke it. And I'm going to admit, everybody, we're going to be talking about fangirls and fandom. I am not from that world, but this book, and yes, I had to, it was just like everything. And I think it helps me to understand why I may not be a part of that world, right? With reading this and understanding that a little bit better. So we're going to get started. We are so happy you're here. Thank you. And I'm going to get started. Okay. So on page 1, you confess, in the realm of the fantastic, I found meaning, safety, catharsis, and hope. Though it eluded me, I needed magic. So when I read that, that really touched me. And even how you talked about magic and with your family and with the tensions between that. So for me being raised in the Black church, I can strongly relate to being taught that magic didn't exist as a child or it was something bad. And of course, like dreaming, I was encouraged to dream and imagine real life, like dream big so that you can have like, you can be the next this, or you could be the next this, or you can set goals for yourself, like that, but not in a fake world, not in magical places, not fantasies and those type of spaces. So but you know unallowed to go outside while my mother was at work. And as you talk about like not having cable, and even in the 90s, not having cable was bad. Like you could not have cable today and still have some decent like shows, but it was like Star Trek. My mother loved Star Trek. It would be like 29 with Star Trek all day and MASH. I ain't know what war they was talking about. And then, that was it when you didn't have cable. So my sister and I, we would make these imaginary worlds while my mother was at work because we couldn't go outside. We couldn't let nobody in the house. And we would make talk shows. We would have all of this like play, and it was just so much fun. So, but still, magic was a sin. But when I would watch movies, I was envious of the ways that white children in the movies that I watched were permitted to imagine and dabble in magic. So, considering all that, can you say more about the fear of magic within particular Black communities and why some parents warn against it?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me on this amazing podcast with incredible Black women scholars who are doing the darn thing in the field. I am so proud of you, so pleased with you, and I'm just really, really happy to be here. So I was always the odd little nerd girl in glasses in a blacky black household, neighborhood, school, and city. And I always felt as if I didn't fit in growing up because the way that I responded to what I now know is racial oppression was to want a means of escape. We all want escape. It's not just the nerds. It's not just people who are in particular school groups. We now know that everyone is searching for some form of escape from it because as human beings, dealing with constant oppression ain't it. And so what I did as a child was to escape into stories. And the stories I found that I liked best were stories that took me away from the world I knew and introduced me to new worlds. So Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, the eminent scholar of multicultural children's literature, uses the metaphor of mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And I felt as if I had enough mirror in my home and school and community and church. I was longing for windows and sliding glass doors. But I hope that when I went through the looking glass, I would encounter myself in a better world or in a different reality. That's what I was hoping. I wanted to find that Black Alice who was living her best life as a little girl. And, seeking it is how I found the path I've been on for the past however many decades. A word about the church. My religious background is very, it's been varied. So mostly Black Baptist, but that is a different story that I may talk about in my next book, where I think about enslavement haunting Black children in literature and media, and the role of enslavement. Like many Black folks, I grew up in the Black church or proximate to it, but my mother was a skeptic. So I also have background with Jehovah's Witnesses, Silent Unity. I explored, did not join, but explored the Nation of Islam,
Mm-hmm.
Sunni Islam, and also Orthodox traditions and Episcopalian. So I did some exploration within Christianity and Islam. And today I've come full circle and I'm a Black Baptist, just like my grandparents were. I do think that religion is something that we have to connect to. Black magic, the Black fantastic, and even Afrofuturism, because there were things that happened in our religious history that disconnected us from the kinds of magical cultural practices that our ancestors engaged in. And those disconnections have happened fairly recently, so post emancipation. So I just wanted to say a word about that. I did not know that when I was writing The Dark Fantastic, but people read your work and they, write you, or they're, we have wonderful colleagues. And so I'm exploring that more.
Yes. And I appreciate how you said that we have to, I think we're taught, particularly in the Christian world, like to just hate everything from our ancestors, like all of the practices, all of the spiritual practices, the magic from our ancestors. And that's not necessarily the case. And my one friend always talks about how if this is why, and they're still existent even in Christian Black spaces, because that's why you can have the same denomination and you go to a Black space and it's totally different from a white space, because we're still bringing our practices, African practices and spirituality to those spaces. So no matter what we do. So
yeah, that's right.
It's always interesting to me to hear different people's religious background and how it connects to magic and dreaming and imagination. Because when I was younger, we went to church. I have no idea what denomination that church was, Baptist, AME, I have no idea. But my mom has always told me, she's like, well, I'm more spiritual than anything. And so there'll be conversations about her talking to the ancestors, or I heard someone was telling me something, or I was sleeping and I had this dream and I had to tell you this. And that to me is her religious practice. And I feel like because of some of that, she's allowed me that space to believe in magic and to believe in dreams and to believe in connection beyond the material in ways that I think that may not have been even uplifted in other households, or even if I live with my dad versus my mom, right? And so it makes me think about why do we need magic? Why do Black folks need magic? What is there and what brings us to it despite those disconnections?
That's what Kashawn Thompson taught us. Black girls are magic, because she said, remember how she said her hashtag has been misapplied and commodified? She said, I did not say Black girl magic, so commodifying, Black girls in a way. So not Black girlhood. If you look at that phrase, it's about the magic, the emphasis on the magic. She said, I said Black girls are magic. So I think it's exactly what you said, Stephanie, that we ourselves are magical. And, what has been handed down to us and what we then, live and practice, and then what we're passing on to the next generations. We ourselves are the magic. I have a book that I've been writing forever. Anybody who knows me knows, you eventually hear about this novel. One day people read it, and I think, people were like, I was disappointed. She's been writing this book for 20, 30 years, and but I do have this line where one of the mentors tells the teenagers that we are magic. No, it's not that we have magic or we wield magic. We are magic. And someone I was working with recently on it asked me, well, what kind of magic? I think, the magical system's too tied to Christianity or traditional religion. You need to make it more voodoo. And I think that sometimes Black syncretic religious practices are very poorly understood outside of our community. Some of that is, the fault of Black leadership, where, a generation or two ago, there was this, integration imperative where we wanted to integrate ourselves into the larger culture, to, close the space between Black Christianity or Black forms of religion and other folks. And we're seeing that some of the gaps are irreconcilable, because clearly we're doing something different when 90% of Black evangelicals or Black Christians are voting one way or have one set of politics and ideologies. And then, it's the complete opposite for white evangelicals. So yeah, just I think that that's awesome, Stephanie, that, you're reminding us that not all Black folks are growing up in the same kinds of households. So not all of our people are religious. A growing number of us are atheists. I have a sister who's a Buddhist. And so I think that that's a good point and something for me to consider.
You mentioned like that gap between like the white church and the Black church, and it reminded me of, like, in your book you talk about the imagination gap, and I think about that in terms, not just in terms of religion, but like what other gaps are there and how, like, do we have to close them, or what does that mean? What do those gaps mean? And I'm thinking about in your book you talk about how there's the imagination gap where there's this limited and problematic representation of Black characters in fairy tales, fantasy, sci-fi, horror, all the speculative genres. And you say, I have long suspected, and I am assuredly not alone, that racialized disparities in literacy attainment among kids and teens may be ultimately rooted in a massive failure of the collective imagination. And something that I'm thinking about is specifically because you say it's not the kids. And I'm thinking about myself as a younger person who, like, my imagination ran wild. And we talked yesterday and I was just like, my imagination is still there. Like, I'm still a dreamer. I'm always going to be someone who's looking towards the future and the stars. But you talk about the fact that, like, it's a failure of adults and it's our imaginations that are failing. And so I'm considering that gap, like, considering that it often begins in the minds of adults. That's teachers, that's parents, that's scholars. What do we need to do to increase our capacity to imagine and dream?
Oh, that's such a good question. I'm still thinking it through too, so I don't know that I have the answer or any definitive answers about this. I think that one of the things that we might do as educators and parents and caregivers and aunties in the community is to rethink the purpose of both education and raising our children. Of course, Black children, but all children across culture. So one of the ways that we have raised our kids and taught them is we teach them a transmission of culture. So, no form of education is completely novel. So, even the Montessori people, we're transmitting. Freire warned us about the banking model 50 years ago, but we are still, a lot of education still is very much banking. These are the things that you need to know, skills orientation. One of the things that we don't do as much, either in education or as caregivers, is to, do this unlocking or fostering or watering of what is already in the child. It's almost like centuries later, we still have this, and I hate to use a Western metaphor, but Black woman living in the West, a Lockean versus a Rousseauian view of the child, whether or not the child is, clay that needs to be shaped into a particular shape, or if the child is born with innate capacity. And those of us who are progressive and radical, we believe the latter, that the child is born with capacity. You see it, both of you, as, we have a mama among us, we are aunties, we are community folk, and we know from the time that you hold that baby, different people seem to have different tendencies toward different things. And you can try to bend that child into place, which is what so much of our society does, from the home to the school to religious institutions to, the criminal justice system, unfortunately, in the street. But people are born with certain bents. And I think that if we can close the imagination gap by noting what kids are already doing and validating it if it's, good. I don't agree. Django Paris talked about sort of the romanticism that those of us who are radical or progressive scholars, he was like, no, you want to make sure that you're not over, it's not disingenuous. But what we can do is that we can, both note and we can nurture whatever is there that is innovative, that is novel, because just like there are things that you all see about our common profession being, a decade, later, I believe our children can see things about our culture and world that we can't see from our vantage point. So I do think that closing the gap involves both, nurturing what's already in the young and really having a desire to make the world, to have a future orientation beyond our lifetimes. I think that that's important. We've lost that with the generation before mine and my generation, where we're not thinking about, we're thinking about retirement. That's sort of the end game for most people. Like, how am I going to retire and who's going to take care of me when I get sick and old? But that is an impoverished worldview. If we were really thinking about planting seeds and nurturing folks who are going to live to see days that we won't see, I believe that we would realize that we have to expand our capacity to imagine. So education would be different, literature would be different, media would be different, the culture would be different. Yeah, so that's where I am now. I'm still thinking it through, though. I told you I didn't have a definitive answer, but those are some of the things I'm starting to think through.
This is the going to the answer. Like I just got my entire life from getting to the answer. I love it. I don't remember where I saw this. I feel like it was Twitter because I'm always on Twitter, but it was, you have to act like you're going to be somebody's ancestor. And that, I feel like it's something that was lost.
I didn't see that, but that's it right there. Mm-hmm. That's it right there. That's it right there. Like, who will remember us when we're gone? How will we be remembered? And even once the last people who remember our names, I watched this video yesterday. I had to stop it because it was titled, in the far future, no one will remember who any of us are, but our presence. Oh, I'm gonna get choked up if you're really getting me down into I'm a crybaby. I will cry. Just thinking, even if our names aren't here, the fact that we existed and lived, it bends the universe in particular ways, right? So while we're here alive, even if you don't have, or believe in faith, because I have a lot of friends who are atheists and agnostic, but, I think that scientists have it right, especially the theoretical physicists. If you listen to enough Carl Sagan and all that stuff, you'll get really inspired in a way that I also get inspired by a good gospel choir. But, we're the universe's witnesses while we're here, just looking up and considering the moment. But then while we're here, we get to choose how we will bend space-time and what direction it will go in the future. So the three of us are having conversations because a generation who did not live to see what we see made some choices so that their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would live in a different time. Mm-hmm. Over the past half century, the adult generations have frankly, collectively made a lot of different choices, ones that do not seem oriented toward lifetimes they won't see. And I hope that, given the pandemic and the current crisis, we will all begin to reconsider our orientations and how we, how our future orientations are. So we need to expand our horizons. Ooh, Stephanie, I think you just gave me, this is why we need to talk. The three of us need to talk more, because the weird thing, it's almost like it's a quantum thing, right? So closing the imagination gap means expanding, sort of it's like, you see what I mean? It's expanding our consideration of, who we are
Yes.
FaceTime. Like we have to, broaden our future orientation. So everybody's like, learn your history. That's what our ancestors and elders said. You need to learn your history as Black folks, but also, asking all people to think beyond the future and not to the next financial quarter. This conversation about your millennials, you all are both millennials. We need to forgive the debt. I don't care that I paid, mine off. Nobody else needs to ever be 44 and finally being financially stable. That's not it. So a future, presentist orientation, where we are, why we have an imagination gap. We can't even imagine a world where nobody has student loan debt. But if we expand our time scales and we think, if we cancel the debt today, sorry, I know this is not about Dark Fantastic, but it is. If we cancel student loan debt this year and that everybody has a zero balance from now on, 50 years from now, I'm getting goosebumps, we're going to reap the rewards. And, in futures, we won't see 50 years from now, 100 years from now, there will be many young people who will be able to eat. Frankly, we're still in a pandemic, purchase a home, start a business. So we need to expand, like our imaginations, but maybe our future imagination. This is something I want to think alongside with you, Stephanie, a little bit more, but we can go on to the next question because I know we have limited time. But yeah, let's think more about that. That's, interesting to contemplate. Like, how do you close the imagination gap?
Mm-hmm. But you just gave me goosebumps. I was like, oh my goodness.
I was really thinking about it. Yeah.
So, okay. So we're going to get a little bit more into the book. Well, we in the book. So in your research of the fantastic, you privilege the fictional imagined Africanist others, building from Toni Morrison's work, which I love, or the vantage point of the dark other, noting that the mere inclusion of characters of color is not enough to emancipate the dark fantastic. So I wonder why the vast majority of dark others in the fantastic films and television series that you researched. So out of all those characters, Black girls and women were more represented as opposed to Black boys and men. And I love how you was like beyond in the book, beyond Will Smith, of course, during your time of research.
I'll just give you an example of what I have gone through trying to publish a fantasy novel featuring a Black boy protagonist who is not nice and who is not corny. He's actually pretty popular. It has been quite a road. I was going to say it's been hell, but eventually, I finally have gotten to the stature where I think if I were to self-publish it, I could sell it if I wanted to. But I want to prove a point. I have been documenting responses to, this idea that a Black boy character could be magical. And it's interesting to see how gender plays a role alongside race, which is why both of your work on Black girlhoods is so important. Stephanie, I'm thinking about your work on Black girls and Afrofuturism. And I think it's so important because I feel as if the genders are lensed differently. So Black girls are slotted into sort of junior helper characters. So we know that among the great caricatures of US and UK literature, we have the Mammy, the Jezebel, the Sapphire, and what we'll see is Black girls and women, but in this case, Black girlhood being cast in junior versions of those roles. So instead of a Mammy, because she is still young and, may not be indexing motherhood, we know from studies of enslavement that young Black women were still cast in those roles and were still expected to not only help, but to nurture, to raise, and to be self-sacrificing for the family of the master above her own. And we see that so much in mainstream, not written by us, science fiction, fantasy, and horror, that we're supposed to be the help. And so there's such a wonderful tradition of looking at classic literature from the point of view of the Black character in the sidelines. So, of course, we have Jubilee and the Wind Dawn Gone, which were retellings of Gone with the Wind. Wide Sargasso Sea, which was a retelling of Jane Eyre. And because I had been considering those, as an English major and, thinking through those, I thought, well, somebody needs to turn these narratives around of young Black girlhood. Now, with the boys, I suspect, and, once we get this in print, and you're starting to get some Black boy narratives soon, within the next few years, I want to see how they're received. One of the things that people wanted me to do that I refused was to critique and catalog or just focus on Black literature. I actually value what we're doing with in own voices, Black science fiction, fantasy, and horror more. But as a critic, I'm looking for a problem to solve. And the problem is I still see mainstream science fiction and fantasy trying to put our narratives in niches and denying Black creators and creatives the audiences and the resources and the merchandising and the access to fan spaces that they need in order for their work to get to Game of Thrones or Star Wars or Star Trek level. So there's some deeper issues. So I wanted to do the call out in the Dark Fantastic. This is very much a thing you're doing. To finish up the answer, I just think that Black boys, because they are, lensed with stereotypes of Black men, they fall down the rabbit hole of not being sympathetic enough. So people are always intrigued by the writing. So I've been trying to sell this book since 2003, 2004. They're intrigued by the writing, but, after multiple rewrites, I'm on rewrite 7, they're saying he's just not sympathetic enough, or he's kind of an asshole, isn't he? He's not, so, and I wanted to write a Black boy who was like the Black boys I taught. Mm-hmm. Who I was, who was teaching, my nephews, a Black boy, my father, a lot of my dad is in him as, from his younger years, and even, Black, boys and men that I have, loved. So I wanted to put that. So I'm not, I think that there's something there that unsettles white supremacy unless the Black man or boy can be caricatured so that, he fits into a white supremacist mold. I do think that Into the Spider-Verse and that, Miles, that vision of Miles Morales really broke the ice for a lot of things. And I'm looking forward to seeing some of the new books that have just been greenlit. Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky was incredible. Shout out to Kwame and Balia, but it is much harder to get the books with Black boys through. And so if books are harder, that shows are even more difficult to lens. Right. And I'll just close this, and I know people are going to hear this and they're going to feel a way when I say this. Because so much of young adult literature and teen media is geared toward middle class and upper middle class white girls and young women, if you put a Black boy into the mix, then you have some of those age-old fears on the part of adults that they want that the white girl will, not just be looking toward, the white hero, but if you have, a quirky or interesting Black boy villain or sidekick, that the interest will go that way. And we certainly saw that with Finn, although that was for general audiences, not just youth and young adults. So yeah, there's some insidious things going on. And of course, we don't have nearly enough trans or non-binary Black children, teens, and young adults. And so, yes, the industry needs to continue being called out as we create our own narratives.
So speaking about gender and how Black girls are represented in these films and television shows, I just want to say that I love your empathy for Black children and youth who find themselves connecting with white characters more than the dark other, as was the case with your niece Deja, right? While she was viewing The Vampire Diaries. And instead, I feel like you help us to understand that white characters are positioned as authentic, innocent, beautiful, good, and truthful, when written into fantastic films and television. So of course, like they may want to identify with them, right? So I wonder what a conversation would sound like between an auntie and her niece, a big cousin and her little cousin, a mother and a daughter, when Black girls ignore, resent, or simply aren't drawn to the Black girl characters on the screen. And at what point could they not need a Bonnie like you?
Ooh, you all are asking some amazing, amazing questions about the book. I have never heard, and I've done many interviews about the Dark Fantastic over the past 2 years. I've never heard the amazing questions that you're asking. So first, I want to let your listeners know that you all are just sharp. Like, okay. So I will say, in Deja's defense, when I finished the book, she was 12, the first draft. And now that she is almost 17, she'll be a senior next year. So she's a junior now. Her development as, a young Black woman, a Black teenage girl has been really influenced. The girl has done a 180 from middle school. So from middle school, now in high school, she goes to a very good suburban high school, but where she is in the minority. And that young woman is going to be an attorney. She wants to attend a Black college. She's become, it's like, how were you radicalized or where were you radicalized? And, sitting side by side in certain classes.
Yes, Deja. Let's just celebrate Deja real quick. Come on. Yes, Deja. You go, baby girl.
So I'm going to have to do an update, and have a conversation with her for the shadow book for readers and followers of my work, because baby girl is just like, no, she would, because about Elena. So but she did feel that way. And I could relate because, I think sometimes we don't want to say the incorrect thing, especially in front of white folks. But here's the thing. YA superstar Danielle Clayton and I had a conversation, I believe in 2016 at San Diego Comic-Con International. We were at the Nerds of Color, Black Girl Nerds Hangout, and this is where I felt like I was fancy. So I've been a professor for about 7 years. I am, in San Diego by the water with, Black folks who are, in television and film and Danielle and I were sitting at a table and Danielle was kind of looking at it all. And she said, there's so much, there are Black fans of all these white helmed properties. So, you all are fans of Star Trek and Game of Thrones and Star Wars and Marvel and DC. She said, what would it take for a Black creator to have this kind of reception for their work? And I've taken her question very seriously. So again, shout out, she and her writing partner, their book Tiny Pretty Things is now on Netflix. So she's doing the thing. And I want to take that seriously because, I think in order to answer that question, we need to look at the first couple of generations of Black authors of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. So it is absolutely flatly ridiculous that we do not yet have an adaptation of Octavia. We are going to get one, I believe, this decade. But people get very upset with me when I say it should have happened. They're like, well, I said, no, it should have happened. Why was her work not adapted while she was still alive? That's number one. So that's one question that I don't find enough people asking. Same with Tananarive Due, who was just, it was just generous. Wonderful. You're right. Horror. We don't have her yet. Instead of greenlighting Game of Thrones, the prequel to Game of Thrones, I'm happy that HBO will be making Who Fears Death by Nnedi Okorafor. I know that Nor Jemison's The Broken Earth, N.K. Jemison's The Broken Earth trilogy has been optioned. It is absolutely ridiculous that HBO didn't snatch that up instead of, we don't want more A Song of Ice and Fire. With all respect, I was so into those books. But after the series did what it did, so there are still barriers to even getting the amplification of the Black fantastic and the Afrofuturistic in certain channels. Now, this is where I part company with people who work in this space who I deeply respect. people who work in this space and see Afrofuturism as an activist movement, they think that the scaling up of it, the commodification of it, and, making it this, behemoth, it's not necessary, because Afrofuturism is within and beyond that. And I see Stephanie nodding. See, Afrofuturism is that's her wheelhouse. And so part of it is, what would it lose if it became a playground for everybody? So I'm still thinking that through, like, what would it take to give a Black creator's work the same kind of cultural heft that we see, inclusion, or this latter day inclusion in white authored, mainly white male authored work. Bridgerton, which we all, watched, or, people enjoyed, but, this is an amazing, incredible Black showrunner who gave me my favorite show of the 2010s. It was Scandal. I was a Scandalholic. I was target demographic for that. And I enjoyed all 7 seasons, even when it, storytelling got, but I do see and hear Shonda Rhimes not wanting to feel like she needs to just adapt the work of Black writers. But the flip side of that is, then you take, then others are being adapted, and then you do the non-traditional race-bent casting, and the effect can be wonky. So these are all very complicated issues. And so I think that because of the complications, Deja and her friends are really coming up in a world where they are trying to make sense of a whole bunch of other factors. But yes, in the story, people want, I'll close with this. After Michonne got with Rick in The Walking Dead, one charge that is often leveled against Black girl mainstream media fans is that we, because I'm one of them, we only care about interracial relationships. So because often it's the Black girl who gets with the white hero. And I said, and I maintain, it's not necessarily that, they're dreaming of being with a white boy or man, although if they are, oh, well, that's fine. He's human. But also, it is the case that a young girl reading this book, not all girls, hashtag not all girls, but the reader is oriented toward falling in love. The reader is oriented toward falling in love with the protagonist, with the focalizer. We know more about him. We know about his hopes and dreams and fears. The very heft of the narrative, the weight of the narrative is around Rick, or is around Arthur and Merlin, or is around there's just so many different examples of this. Grant Gustin's The Flash, Barry. There's, so of course the Black girl watching or reading is going to root for her mirror, like her avatar. I won't say her mirror, her avatar in the story to get with the prize, or who the narrative prizes. And so that's all that is. That's Black girls and women being human. And so it's not necessarily that they're playing into, people do a lot when it comes to Black fandom and fan culture. We don't talk enough about, because it's not, it's better to talk about ideology and not talk about the sheer, desire or, fantasy space of being in fandom, like where you're not thinking about political, think about, if I were her, I would want to get with him. It's just very, we don't talk often about that. And I didn't get really into the weeds of that in the Dark Fantastic Beyond the Gwen chapter. And I didn't really go there. But, same thing with Bonnie and Damon, who were a couple in the books. But there was no way they were going to let their heartthrob on that show back then, 10 years ago, get with the Black girl sidekick character. That was just that was beyond the showrunner, Julie Plek's imagination. Wasn't going to happen.
Julie Plek. So, oh yeah. I'm thinking about like all these representations of Black girls that we've talked about, and also Black boys in these genres, specifically when they're created by white folks. But within the last I would say 5 to 8. I'm not going to go to 10 yet. Within the last 5 to 8 years, there's been a number of like sci-fi, fantasy, and horror books that are featuring Black girls and a few smatterings of Black boys. But why now?
Oh, that's such a good question. First of all, my theory for that, Stephanie, or Dr. Stephanie, is Marvel ate the universe. Because, no, really, I feel like it was a like if you think about bells tolling, 4 things happened to move the culture. It was the big three speculative narratives during the 2000s, and then the beginning of the MCU in the late 2000s with Iron Man. Like, basically, the story of the 21st century has been the story of the story of 21st century entertainment and media has been the story of speculation because of those 4 properties. Harry Potter. I mean, Lord of the Rings adaptation can kind of be seen as a harbinger, but I don't count it there. I would argue as a critic, it's Harry Potter, Twilight, The Hunger Games, and then the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which was one of the most ambitious in scale storytelling feats ever. Of course, you have Star Wars, you have the resurgence, the current resurgence of Trek, but all of that followed those 4 properties because Harry Potter was followed up. It was really Harry Potter and MCU. I can really count, however we feel about Rowling, and she has some. I completely disagree with her anti-trans statements. I will say that I completely disagree with. But Harry Potter was like dropping a bomb in the middle of the staid children's book industry, which had existed a particular way for a century. And nothing, people in the children's book world think about before Potter and after Potter. And then with the cinematic world, like the MCU, and just what happened was everybody grew up on Potter, and then some of the people turned to Twilight. That was a smaller subset. And then the Hunger Games. So those were smaller phenomena, but really that primed people to keep wanting speculative storytelling. And it was a sea change from my generation where fewer of us, now they're all into it, or they were all secretly nerds, but it was, our generation even had a phrase for it, keeping it real, like we really, Generation X was not noted for valuing, en masse or en masse, science fiction, fantasy, horror. It did mark you socially in particular ways in the 80s and 90s. It just did. And so that's what I think has happened. So, yeah.
We had to stop, y'all, but Dr. Ebony Elizabeth Thomas has promised to come back so that we can continue this rich discussion. After engaging in this generative dialogue, we challenge ourselves and you to increase our dreaming capacity, imagination, and to live like an ancestor, that is, living beyond our immediate futures. We support Dr. Thomas's fight for more Black boy protagonists in fairy tales, fantasy, and sci-fi, and her fight for Black creatives to receive the support they need for their work to be successful. Please go out and get her book, The Dark Fantastic: Race and the Imagination from Harry Potter to the Hunger Games, today. Thank you for listening to part 2 of our Liberate Your Imagination, the Dark Fantastic, and Black characters in fairy tales, fantasy, and sci-fi series. Be sure to tune in for parts 3 and 4, our next 2 episodes where we interview the organizers of the Wakanda Alliance program so that you can learn more about the work, how all of these ideas are enacted. Trust, you do not want to miss that. To find out more about the Evolving Education Project, to write in, or to join our listserv, check us out at evolvingeducationproject.com. And please download this podcast, subscribe, and follow us on Instagram. Please follow us on Instagram and love all of our posts. Like, just do that one day. I mean, it's a way to support us that's free. Don't you love free support? We hope to cultivate an authentic audience and community. We want you to help us to evolve over time and shape what this could be. Now that you know what we're about, let us know what you want to learn more about, authors that you would like us to interview, discussions you would like to have. Okay, that's all for now, good people. We out.